Hello and welcome to the last of 3 videos on the Latin participles. In this video I want to talk about the future participle. I'll begin by explaining how the future participle is formed. We start with the perfect participle, which, as I've said, is passive. Portatus, having been carried. We now break this apart in the way shown on the slide. Into this breach, we slide the 2 letters UR. And then we close up the break, giving us portaturus, being about to carry. This is not a participle that we use very much in English, though we can form a future participle. Be aware that in Latin the future participle is always active. There is a passive future participle, but this is a comparative rarity that I will leave to a more advanced discussion. So portaturus, being about to carry. Let's move to its forms. Here is the usual table. It is a 2-1-2 participle or a 2-1-2 adjective. That is, it is in its forms a second declension masculine adjective, a first declension feminine adjective, and a second declension neuter adjective. There will be no surprises about its various endings. Here they are: portaturus, portatura, portaturum. Here is the complete form of the masculine future participle. Do I really need to complete the table? You should be able to complete this by yourself, but I will complete it. Here is the feminine form of the future participle, and here is the neuter form. As I've said, there should be no surprises about how this participle is formed. I will add that it is a completely regular participle. Any Latin word that looks like an adjective and has UR close to the end is almost certainly a future participle, and there is no future participle which does not have that distinctive UR near to the end. So let's have a look at how the future participle is used. We'll start with this one. Femina dictura virum vidit. The woman, about to speak, saw her husband. That's what it says, and that may be what it means, though, as ever with these participles, it is often a good idea to be more imaginative in your translation and to ask yourself, what would the writer have said had he been writing in English? You may therefore want to translate it as a relative clause. The woman who was about to speak saw her husband. Or you may want to translate it as a time clause. When she was about to speak, the woman saw her husband. You may wish to recompose the sentence entirely to express what you believe its sense to be in our own idiomatic English way. But femina dictura virum vidit can just about be translated as a default, the woman about to speak saw her husband. It's rather clumsy. It may not be a completely accurate representation of what the writer was trying to say, but it will do as a safe default translation. The future participle also serves as part of a periphrastic future infinitive. What we mean by this, what we mean by periphrastic, is that Latin has no built-in future infinitive. Instead, it has to be put together in much the same way as we put infinitives and participles and tenses and just about everything else together in English. So we have portaturus esse, to be about to carry. This isn't, I must confess, in itself a very useful construction. At least it isn't very useful in English, but it is very useful in Latin. As you probably know, and if you don't know, you soon will know, Written Latin has a prejudice against the use of quod as a subordinating conjunction. That means that it doesn't like to use that in order to connect two clauses. Let's take the Latin for the text from the book of Job. I know that my Redeemer liveth. You can say this in Latin as Scio quod redemptor meos vivit. Or as St. Jerome did, you could say Scio quod redemptor meos vivat. In later Latin, quod is used as a subordinating conjunction with the subjunctive. But let's stay with Scio quod redemptor meos vivit. Notice here that quod and that serve exactly the same function. Indeed, these sentences are functionally identical. All that is different is the words. The grammar is the same. Scio quod redemptor meos vivit. I know that my Redeemer liveth. But you can't do that in the classical language. No doubt it was done all the time in the spoken language, but you can't do it in the classical or the written language. Instead, you have to use what is called an infinitive and accusative construction. So not Scio quod redemptor meos vivit, but Scio meum redemptorem vivere, or I know my Redeemer to live. Why this prejudice against quod existed so strongly in classical Latin, I really can't say. It is not a prejudice you see in Greek, and the Romans generally took their lead from the Greeks, but it was a very strong prejudice, and infinitive and accusative constructions were the preferred way of expressing indirect speech. Now, where future participles, or perhaps future infinitives, come in so useful is as part of what's called a reflexive, accusative and infinitive construction, especially one where the main verb is in the past. Take this in English. You said you'd be here at 5. No, I said that I would try to be here at 5. Nothing at all complex about that construction, surely. It's something that we use all the time. It is, though, a bitch to say when the that construction is not allowed, as is the case in classical Latin. You need to say something like Juvenis haec se facturum esse dixit, which means the young man declared himself to be about to do these things, or, in normal English, the young man said he would do it. You could do that so easily in Latin if you allowed quod, but because quod isn't allowed, you have to use that reflexive, accusative and infinitive construction. Juvenis haec se facturum esse dixit. You will see these constructions very often, and so it's worth pausing over this slide and making yourself familiar with the construction. Or, very rarely, and then mostly in rather late prose, though sometimes in poetry, a future participle is used, as in Greek, for a purpose clause. Here's an example. Iter Londinium feci, reginam specturus. Literally, you could translate that as, I went to London being about to look at the Queen. However, again as in Greek, a future participle in Latin can be used in place of a standard purpose clause. So you would translate iter Londinium feci reginam specturus as I went up to London to look at the Queen. Or here is an actual example of a future participle used in a purpose clause. This is from Pliny the Younger's account of the eruption of Vesuvius. Deducit quadriremes, laturus auxilium. He launched warships so he might bring help. You won't see future participles very often used in purpose clauses, but you will sometimes see them, and it's worth bearing in mind. So this is the future participle, and here are the main points to take away. A future participle is always active. Mind you, as I said at the beginning, there is a passive future participle, but this is not something that it is necessary for beginners or intermediate students to look at the moment. A future participle can be translated as about to, or as a relative clause, who or which, or as a time clause, when, or as an adverbial clause, because, etc. But probably the future participle is used most often with esse as a periphrastic future infinitive for statements about the future when the main verb is in the past. And here is another example of that. The king promised to declare war, or the king promised he would declare war, something like that. You put this into Latin as Rex promissit se bellum in laturum esse. The king promised himself to be about to declare war. A bit of a mouthful in English, and because it's a bit of a mouthful in English, you may think that it's rather a clumsy construction in Latin. If, however, you take the Latin in itself and don't translate it in your head into English, Rex promissit se bellum in laturum esse. It's not the same mouthful in Latin as it is in English. But whatever you think about it, there is the future participle. This is the last of my 3 videos on the Latin participles. Of course, I have not said everything that can be said about the participles. I have not said everything that should be said about the participles. But I do think that, bearing in mind my probable audience of beginners or intermediate students, I have said everything that it is necessary at the moment to say. So thank you for having watched this video, and I hope you will now seek out and watch my other videos on Latin and on Greek grammar. Many thanks.